The moment is here, you can stop your search. It's Comics by Perch.
Hey everybody, this is Perch. This is a mail that I think will get me into trouble from someone. I have a couple of suspects in mind, but we're going to try it anyway. Here goes the question. Hey Perch, thank you for all you do. Really love your show and always entertained by your opinions. Well, that's a big old lie, but that's okay. My question is around creators who lose heat, to use a wrestling term that I know you will appreciate. Creators that were once red hot, but then over time have cooled to the point that they're no longer a draw that they once were. My question is, what causes this to happen besides the obvious? The obvious being the titles they put out aren't very good. Also, related to that, do the creators realize that they've lost heat? Meaning, do some of the creators still pretend that they're as big a deal as they were 20 or 30 years ago? I'm thinking of a couple individuals on Twitter that I probably shouldn't name, but they act as though they are still at the top of their game when clearly the industry has passed them by. Oh hell, oh hell, why not? I'll go ahead and say two examples like Kurt Busiek and Eric Larson. Both act like they're big stars in this business, but clearly they are not. Okay, this mail got very personal. Yikes. Okay. Curious to get your take on this. Always interested to have your opinion. Thank you for all you do. All right. So, first part first. What causes a creator, a writer, an artist, what causes them to, as you say, lose heat? So if you're not into wrestling, you know what that means. Basically, I think it's pretty obvious for the question. It means that once upon a time, you were a big draw. People saw your name, they bought your book. You could bring people into a comic shop. Oh, there's a new comic being, launched by, this creator. I've got to buy that. An example of this you can kind of see is Chris Claremont. So still a legend, still a great writer, still somebody that I will, go and pick up their books whenever they come out. Absolutely. However, and Chris Claremont himself has said this in interviews. So that's why I feel very safe using him as an analogy. I don't, if he gets offended by it, then, who are kidding? He's not listening to the show. No, he actually has listened to a few of he has listened to the show before, but not regularly, I'm sure. But once upon a time, if you look at the 80s, Chris Claremont, you put him on a comic, people bought it. Just that name alone, they're in. And this was also during an era where the artist was a far bigger draw than the writer in a lot of respects. But Claremont was a must-buy. And then I think when he got taken off X-Men and he came back on X-Men, and then he kind of he did Fantastic Four in there, and then he, did his own creator, some other stuff, and today, Chris Claremont is no longer a must-buy, and like I said, he himself recognized this of, once upon a time, if I was on a book, it sold. Now I have to work hard. I don't remember exactly how he said it, but basically, it's he was a big star, and he's still a big star in my book, but, he doesn't move books like he used to based on his name alone. All right, fair enough. So what causes that to happen? Well, yes, obviously, if the person starts putting out bad stories, then they cool. If the art gets hacky, it's not as big a draw. By the way, another name I'll just throw out here as an example that some of you may disagree with, Todd McFarlane. So there was a moment, again, when Todd McFarlane was doing Spider-Man, moved over and did Spawn, where in that zone, in that 2 to 3 year span of Spider-Man to Spawn, Todd McFarlane was the shit. He moved, all kinds of titles. Today, Spawn is outsold, and this is going to make you hurt. Spawn is being outsold right now by that New Mutants Lethal Legion book by Charlie Jane Anders. That it's true. Spawn isn't moving as many titles anymore. Now, granted, Todd's not drawing, but still, it's part of it's so he starts putting out lousy stories. A bigger part of those is just time. Like anything, if a creator stops doing regular work, they cool. Right now, guy I absolutely love, Art Adams. If Art Adams came on, like Art Adams is doing a graphic novel of Art Adams artwork, there'd be interest, not as much as 15 years ago. Same thing could be true of Walt Simonson, Hell John Byrne. A lot of people I love. Just time does have a way. Time does not make the heart grow fonder. It makes the heart forget. And so that's a big deal, is that. The other one is just screwing around with the career, meaning if a creator, this is kind of the lesson I think very few people have learned, is you take a guy like Claremont, and he does a lot of X titles and becomes known as like the grandfather, the godfather of the X books. And even Louis Simonson was on there, and John Bernke wrote some, and just Jim Lee did some. But even when he had other people coming in doing the books, Claremont was considered the godfather, and he's a godfather because he was on the book for a long, long time. Fans, whether they're new or old, value long runs. They value, being connected to just a creator connected to a character is a big deal. That's why John Byrne on Fantastic Four for that long run will always connect him with that run. But what they do a lot now of is the creators bounce around all over the place. R.B. Silva got a great kind of running start with the was he on House of X or Powers of 10? He was on House of X, right? I think, is that right? Anyway. But then Marvel bounced him over to this book, and he was just R.B. Silva was just on one issue of this Captain America Cold War series. One issue. And I think that's all. I think he's only on one issue of this crossover. And R.B. Silva, you go back in time 3 years ago, was a huge up-and-coming hit artist that, was starting to move books on his name alone. You could say the same thing for Oliver Capil. All kinds of people fit that bill. But when the publisher starts moving them around from title to title, sometimes without warning, or they come on, they do the first 3 issue of a new series that the publisher is rebooting, and then they vanish, they go off to something else, they cool. And I think this is one of the biggest areas where artists should put their foot down with a publisher to say, no, if I'm going to come out, I'm going to do this book, you're going to sign me for 12 issues. And by the way, some artists say, I don't want to do 12 issues, I just want to do 3 issues, and then we can see from there. In that case, the artists themselves is screwing their career. And I've heard artists tell me, I like to bounce around to lots of different books because then I get, original art for a lot of different characters that I can go sell. Sounds good. It's money in the hand today that screws you in the long run. Because nothing helps build your career and your value like having a long run on a character. I mean, okay, so another example, Sean Gordon Murphy. He's been doing the White Knight thing now for 3 volumes, and he's done lots of different titles. He's got a really good kind of bounty of work of White Knight. Now he can go and do other things, and and the stuff he's announced. I know he's announced he's doing Zorro, and he's going to hold his value. He's going to continue to be hot. But if he comes back every now and then does Batman, that's always going to sell really well. And he's got what Sean has to do is he's got to figure out how to go, put his mark on a couple other iconic characters to keep building his career. That's what he should do. But imagine a Sean Murphy that did one White Knight series. That's it. And then he bounced over and he did Doom Patrol for 3 issues because they wanted Sean Murphy to relaunch Doom Patrol. And then 6 months went by, and then they had Sean Murphy come on to do 4 issues of Teen Titans. And then 3 more months went by, and he kind of disappeared. Then he did, some Vertigo one-shot. And then he did nothing but covers for 2 years. And then he came back and he did, one story in an anthology issue for Pride featuring Wonder Woman. And then, if that was what he was doing, he would not be nearly as hot as he is today, because fans like to see a long run of one artist of rendition on a character. It helps build heat. And same thing with a writer. Writers who bounce around a lot. Even writers, I know a lot of them have done it lately, where they write kind of a comic for one of the big 2, and then they go out and they do 50 comics on their Substack, whatever it happens to be. And that hurts them. You could Scott. Okay, so we're getting Scott Snyder, for example. He, for everything else that he's done, and he's done a lot of other books, he's a guy who had a long run on Batman. And so even when he went off and he did the Death Metal series, and they said it was it's a Wonder Woman story at its heart, It wasn't really. It was a bad event. I mean, that's not by the way shortchanging Scott. It's just he is the bat writer. That's how he established himself. The further and further away we get from his time on the bat books, the lower the heat. He's not going to sell as many books. If he comes out and they say, Scott Snyder has gone to Marvel exclusive, and Scott Snyder is now doing the Avengers. There'll be people who are like, oh, wow, Scott Snyder and the Avengers. But it will not be nearly as hot as it would have been, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when he's coming off of a long run at DC, where he did Justice League over there. And I mean, I might even argue, his Bat series got a lot of acclaim and really built his foundation. When he went on Justice League, he won that title for a little while, but it's still, it wasn't the legendary like Scott Snyder on Justice League that people probably expected. And it was because he made his name on one title on Batman, and then he moved and he didn't, have the same length of run as he did on Batman. Anyway, there's just, and by the way, don't ask me to say, does this make logic? This is how fans and customers think. If Scott Snyder went over and he's like, now Scott Snyder is doing Captain America at Marvel, it would not have anywhere close to the same kind of impact as it would have, several years ago. Prior, if he'd gone right off of Batman onto Captain America, it would have been a huge deal. Just like it was kind of a huge deal when Scott Snyder went on to Justice League. That was a huge deal. But, then kind of bouncing around, doing the event and kind of the different things he's done. And then certainly the last couple of years doing his own thing. I'm sure his own thing was super lucrative, but he's just not at that, hot level. Right now, we see Donny Cates, whose kind of star is falling, in a big part because, he left abruptly off a book, didn't finish his own run. He had 2 short runs with Thor and Hulk, and then he's kind of just disappeared. Now, he's doing Vanish, but by and large, his star is nowhere remotely close to as hot as it was when he was doing Venom. Now, it's not to say he can't get it back, but what he's going to have to do to get it back is do a long run on a book. When I say long run, I'm talking, 2 years more, doing big things. The era of the miniseries and the just short little bouncing around of creative teams on books, the publisher may like that because they're getting little trades they can put in, and they're not spending too much. They can actually drive their costs down a little bit that way. But the other thing, and I have no evidence to believe this is, I have no evidence beyond my own gut. I think the publishers love kind of as it's evolved, because what it's done is it's taken a lot of the negotiating power away from the writers and the artists. They have less than they used to. I mean, right now, if you're Marvel and Donny Cates, cleans himself up and it's like, all right, I'm ready to come back to work, Marvel can lower his rate. They can say, yeah, I hear that, but you walked out on us and you've been gone for a little while, and, things have kind of plodded along, and, we're going to offer you a little less. They could do that. And they'd probably be justified to do that. Because Donny Cates, if suddenly Marvel announces Donny Cates is back on a new book and it's amazing, then, if 100 fans would have been really excited about it a year ago, we're at like 80 fans now. And every 6 months that goes by, that number drops probably by 10 to 15 fans. It's the law of time. Now, to kind of very, very quickly hit the last part of your question, do the creators know or do they realize that they've lost heat? Yeah, most don't. A lot of creators kind of, and this isn't really inherent to comics, a lot of people remember the moment when they're at their top, whether they're sports stars, whether they're whoever they are. They remember that moment when they're at their peak, and in their soul, that's where they believe they are, at that peak. There's been lots and lots and lots of occasions of creators who completely misjudge where they are in the popularity curve of their own career. And, I don't know what can be said about that other than, it's true. And I think that it's a shame. There are people who recognize where they are, for sure. There's plenty of creators who understand that their star is not as big as it used to be, and they live with it, and they're okay with it. But there's definitely people out there who just do not have the self-awareness to realize that, hey, maybe going off and doing a bunch of indie work over the last 2 years has lowered your overall, hype in a store. And a lot of the fault here is a lot of comic creators, writers, artists, whoever they might be, go into their local comic shop where, of course, they're treated like a hometown hero. It's like, oh my God, we're going to do something. We're so excited for you. Yeah. And if they go to a Comic-Con, they're likely to get that same kind of interaction because you're getting the hardcore faithful at that con who are really excited to see you and get things signed and everything else. But if you look at the numbers, if you just look at the sales kind of day in and day out, time is a killer. And as much as, it's other people's, it's a question from a while back, why work for Marvel and DC if they pay like shit? Well, because that's where a lot of the attention is. Love it, hate it. A lot of people on the internet hate the fact that that's true, but it is. If you step out of Marvel, if you are big at Marvel and DC, and you step away from Marvel and DC, your odds of staying at the same popularity level plummet. Just they do. Sorry to say. Now that doesn't necessarily mean you're making less. In many cases, some of these creators have gone out and signed really good deals with Substack and Comixology and all these other places. They've gotten good paychecks for sure. But some financially it may be the right decision. But if we're talking about fame, Marvel and DC are the spotlight. If you work there, it is. Sean, who's been on this show, I'd say Sean Murphy, had the White Knight series. It was big. Still is big. A lot of people respect him for Batman and the work that he did there. He's going to do Zorro. I think it'll be amazing. I'm looking forward to reading it. But Sean needs to be clever about his career, and I'm sure that he is. And he's going to have to dip his toe back into the big two every now and then. Probably DC because that's where he's been. And he's going to have to, make sure that, the little spotlight stays on. Unless his indie career, unless he can transition to be a Robert Kirkman-like person who, can make the indie world work for him. But that's, I wouldn't say 1 in a million, but maybe it is 1 in a million. Certainly 1 in 1,000. It's hard to do that. So, it's just that that's just fact of life. But no, I think a lot of creators who lose that popularity don't realize, acknowledge it, or maybe in some deep, dark place in their soul they do, but they would never say it out loud, and it's because it's too painful. You always want to be at the top of your game. Who doesn't? Anyway, thank you very much for the question, and thanks for listening.